are now recording. All right, thank you for joining us for another episode of Noire Life Magazine Presents. I am the host and editor-in-chief, David Cheney Jr. And tonight I have the pleasure of having one of my, I have to say this, one of my former teachers, forever mentor with me tonight, who is amazing to say the least. And I'm going to mess up her last name. I know I am. I only know about her I remember her by her maiden name, but Miss Tanesha, as we used to call her when I was in high school, is joining us tonight to talk about her amazing organization to help fight back against domestic violence. As some of you may or may not know, that October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And we definitely want to have those conversations. As my a friend likes to say, those courageous conversations, especially about subjects like this, which is still, even in 2020, taboo in the Black community and in Black culture. We talk about what recently happened with, Megan Thee Stallion and Tory Lanez, right? Which all is a part of domestic violence. We have to talk about all of these things, but I'm going to let her introduce herself, do a little intro, and then we'll jump right in.
Okay. Hello to everyone that's going to be tuning in. Thank you for having me, David. It's such a pleasure to see you all grown up. It's kind of funny sitting here talking to you. So I am Tanesha Ash-Shakoor, and I am the founder and CEO of Voices of Color. This was founded and started in February of 2015, and I am Voices of Color is a 501c3 nonprofit currently here in the state of Michigan, providing domestic violence services. We are essentially a hub in the state of Michigan with unlimited resources for victims and survivors of domestic violence, and we are an inclusive organization. So we recognize that domestic violence is not a woman-only issue. So we assist with men, women, and also it's not based on your sexual preference. So we also is for the heterosexual, homosexual community, the LGBTQIA community, however you want to see yourself. At the end of the day, it is saving a life. And so that's what Voices of Color is here to do.
I like that. So we talked before about your story and how this all came to be, how it was birthed. Could you tell us a little bit about how has domestic violence directly impacted your life?
Okay, so back in 2006, after graduating from North Carolina Central University, I obviously started my career. I was a teen court coordinator in Nash and Edgecombe County, which is how I met you, David. One of the greatest volunteers I could have possibly had. During that time, so in February of 2007, I had already knew a gentleman from undergrad that we were friends with benefits, if you would have me say that. And after graduating, I essentially decided, he was having some problems with his family, and they were saying like he couldn't come back there to stay. And so, saying that he was an alcoholic of any nature, I decided, hey, just come stay with me as a friend. And during that time, once he moved in with me in 2007, a month later when we decided to enter into an actual relationship, that's when I started experiencing domestic violence.
What were some of the signs that helped you recognize, like, okay, this is not normal. This is dangerous.
Honestly, to be truthful, and I think this is why it's such a complicated thing to really understand when you're in the midst of it. When it initially happened, I can't say I knew when it started. Hindsight, I can say yes, but in the context of what you're asking me the question, I would say me speaking now for someone that was in it at the moment, I did not notice the initial signs. I think when it became evident to me that he was showing some jealousy and aggressive behaviors. Was times when I would get ready to leave for work and he would mush my head into a mirror, or his verbal words sometimes were a bit aggressive in terms of always accusing me of cheating or something of that nature. So the verbal was beginning to be evident, but I kind of wrote it off as he's insecure right now because he didn't have a job, he didn't have any money, and I saw it as he had some insecurities because of his current status at the moment, and thinking that once we were able to stabilize him with a job and he could feel like he was being a man, that those things would go away. So initially, what should have been red flags for me were me writing them off as other things.
Um, I know we had this conversation as well about when you were the coordinator, and you said that even during that time period, you were going through it, and I was just kind of like, we never noticed. We never,
Yeah.
because you always came to court, literally on your A game, and you always have a smile. You was always very encouraging, and you was very supportive. How's school going? How are classes going? How's my sister treating you? Because at the time, and I'll tell people this, her sister was my English teacher when I was in ninth grade. And so I had two girls, the white girls as we call them, because that was their last name, who was like my teacher. So one was out of school, one was in school. And she would always tease me about, because we're from the same county, but we're from different parts of the county. And so she would always tease me about my hometown. But I remember just that fun loving big sister relationship that you had with all of us, and we
Mhm.
never picked up on it. And so
Yeah.
my question would be, how in the world did you carry that burden? How did you hide it so well?
I think because the only thing that I had left was where I was going in life. And so, I was very big on ultimately wanting to be an attorney. My, and also being what I needed to be for you guys who were, looking up to me and wanting to do things like that. Honestly, teen court was my outlet. And so it was easy to, once I left my home, to be who I ultimately wanted to be, to not have to think about my abuse, to not have to, it was my safe place. It was a place of refuge. It was the love and the compassion that I got from all of you. Certainly made me whole in that moment. I felt like I was purpose. I felt like I was successful, and so it made it easier to show up and be the part, right? Because these were all the things that I also needed in my home that I wasn't getting, and to show up, I could put. It was really like all of that was, it was just in the back of my head. I didn't have to live. I could live outside of my burdens during teen court. And as you know, teen court pretty much became my life. And that was probably why, because I lived and breathed teen court and you guys. So,
Yeah, that's true. We had a lot of fun with things.
yeah,
Um,
I miss it.
oh God, yeah. If I could go back, but you know, in talking about that, when did you finally leave? What was the last straw for you? What was the thing that was like, you know what? Like, we're done today. Like, this is it.
David, and to be completely honest with you, I didn't leave on my own accord. So essentially, with any abusive relationship, it only gets worse, right? So it went from the physical, the verbal, mental, the physical, and then sexual. So he raped me several times, and I still woke up with a smile on my face every day to go to the world. And through all of that, the one incident that officially somewhat got me out was um, one night I was able to escape from him, and I had just on my pajamas, no undergarments. And literally, I was like, okay, when he turns his back and walks, I'm gonna you gotta leave out of here. You gotta run, but you gotta grab a coat because it's cold out. So I had all of this kind of strategizing in my head, and so that's what I did. I ran, and I had already, because I had been dealing with it for some time. I pretty much could calculate his move, but I had to be strategic about every move. And when I grabbed my coat, put my coat on, I anticipated that he would catch me before I actually got down the steps. But I knew once he grabbed me, he was going to grab me by my coat. And that would give me more time because I could come out of my coat. So once he grabbed my coat, I came out of my coat and I kept running to my car. I was able to drive away. And as I was living in Nashville, North Carolina at the time, and I remember driving past a store, and actually one of my dear friends, she always worked like third shifts, and she just happened to be at the store getting gas. And I passed her, I just kind of like, boom, I just kept going. And then as I got a little bit down the road, I said, oh my God, I need someone to be able to vouch to say they saw me. And I had to battle at that moment and make a judgment call as to, do I go back for so someone can say at this time they had put their eyes on me, or do I keep going and I take the chances that I get somewhere, no one's ever seen me again or anything. I made a decision to go back so that I can have an eyewitness. And I went back to the store. And when I pulled up, I just said, hey, I don't have long to talk. I just need, she's like, what is going on? I'm crying. She obviously sees me out half dressed. And I'm telling her, and I already knew, and I just said, I don't have long to talk because more than likely he's going to leave home soon and he's going to come this way more than likely. And I was really risking him showing up to the store at the time I was talking to her. Well, and that's what happened. But I at least now had a witness to know what happened, to know what was going on. And he showed up to the store and he asked me to get out the car. I used it as an opportunity because I was half dressed and I know he wouldn't want the public to see me like that. Or men per se, even if it's 1 o'clock in the morning. And so I was like, oh, I kept calm. I was like, okay, babe, I'll go back. But you don't want me to get out of the car. Like I'm not dressed. I don't have on a bra. I don't have on these things. And he was like, okay. And I kept saying, okay, I know he's going to follow me back to the house. Like, how do I get back out of this now? But at least I have this friend who now knows. And I knew more than likely she would call my mom. She was going to tell my mom at some point, whether that was that night or the next day. I knew she would. And I went back home and I said, as soon as he parks his vehicle, I'm going to take back off again. Well, when I pulled into the parking space, he blocked my car in with his SUV. So my car was facing this way and he pulled in like this. He came and he was punching the windows like, get out the car, get out the car. And I said, okay, babe, by the time you park, I'll be out the car and we can go and talk. Just really staying calm. And that's what he did. He parked. And as soon as I saw him walk in front of my car, like he was headed up the steps, I took off again. And I literally sat in Chili's parking lot in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, and slept in the parking lot that night, just not knowing what to do because I had options, right? I could have went to my parents' house. But David, this is the part that people don't understand. I didn't do that because had I done that, my parents would be incarcerated to this day.
Hey,
And I had to
family works back home. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, my parents would have been incarcerated and I could not live with, I wouldn't have been able to live with that. And so I had to figure it out for myself without also putting my family in danger. So based on his calculation, I sort of knew that he would go back to he would leave, but he probably wouldn't be there when I went back at like 8 o'clock in the morning. So I decided to go back to the house. He wasn't there as I anticipated. Um, and he had went to work that day, everything, came home that night like nothing had happened. He did rape me that night. He did return. And we went to bed like nothing happened. And the next morning, as it was, we were, sort of waking up, but not yet, my phone rang. And I was so scared when my phone rang because that's how much on edge he had me. If it was a number that I didn't know, like I had to be cheesed, I was just like, oh my God, I just hated for my phone to even ring. And I saw it was my mom. I was scared, but had a sense of relief all at the same time. And I just said, you got to answer the phone because you already know probably why she's calling. Mm-hmm. And when I answered, let's just say my mama had some choice words and she said, put that on the phone. And I'm saying to myself, oh God, I don't know if this is going to go good, bad, or indifferent. And I gave him the phone. And my mom just basically told him to package and get out the house. He better be gone by the time she get there. And of course, most abuses are very, they're cowardly. And so just my mom telling him that, he got up, began to gather his little things. But he kept telling me the whole time when he gave me back the phone, like, tell her everything is okay. Tell her everything is okay. He kept whispering it to me. And I kept saying, and I'm boo-hoo crying because I'm like, thank you, Jesus. I made a decision to go back, anticipating what would happen, and my plan worked out.
Yeah.
Now I have to stay strong to get through this moment, right? He's telling me to tell my parents it's okay, but I know I need him out. And I know I don't have the strength because I've been fighting for so long, and I don't have the strength to fight back anymore. And my mom was in my ear here. He's standing in front of me, but my mom is talking to me. She just keeps, she said, are you afraid of him? I just broke down crying. I couldn't even answer. And she said, baby, what I need you to do is I need you to stop crying. And I'm like, Mama, you know what? She said, baby, what I need you to do is stop crying because you don't need him to see the fear in you right now. And I thought about it. I said, you know what? She's right. Even though I couldn't stop crying, I understood what she was saying. And then she said, and I also got to tell you something else. She said, I'm not coming. And I couldn't understand it. What do you mean you're not coming? You just told me you was coming to like save me. Mm-hmm. I'm not coming right now because I'm scared he will barricade you in the house if I come right now. I need him to think that I'm coming. So that, and then she said, as soon as he leaves, baby, I will be there. And literally that's what she did. And that was my exit out. Yeah.
That, just thinking about that you went through all of that while yet, and I'm getting kind of emotional thinking about it because you poured so much into us.
Yeah.
And we never even could imagine that you were dealing with that. Like you had this whole burden on you coming in. I think we met maybe twice a week, babysitting court, and you would come in with smiles and hugs and encouragement and just pour into us country kids who want to get out the country. And you, just to know that you went through that is so, it's just amazing to show how resilient you are and how amazing, like, there's no other word to describe it. Like, that was all like strategic and God planned how you worked that out. Because that was smart because a lot of times, and this is not only from having friends who've been in situations like that, but from statistics, even when you set up what seems to be a solid escape plan, they can, because they're unpredictable. The abuser is unpredictable. And so
they're very unpredictable and yet predictable, if you know what I mean. Like some pattern, they have a unpredictable in the emotions. You never really know when they're gonna spaz out, right? Yet their patterns begin to, you can, if you are intentional, you can kind of see patterns. And Um, but what it did for me was it made me a manipulator because I had to learn how to be a manipulator like he was to beat him at his own game sometimes and to also survive. And so I became skilled at doing the same things and really figuring out, and that's the part people don't understand. Everybody wants to ask, why don't you just leave? Why don't you just leave? I'm like, can we stop asking the victim why don't they just leave and start asking them,
Yes.
so why do you abuse in the first place? Like if you ask that question, go ask them. Stop asking us the question. Go ask them why do they even abuse in the first place? Um, and the fear of leaving, as you know, statistics are much higher of a fatality when you're leaving.
Yeah.
The chances of you being killed is higher at the point when you're ready to leave a relationship. And so it takes time, it takes preparation, and so many people getting involved could put your life in so much more danger.
Yeah. And shout out to your mother. Let me tell y'all something about Black moms. They have a superpower that is like no other. And I definitely have women like that in my family that all they got to do is make a phone call. You saw how your mom made that call? And fool was up packing his duffel bag, right? And
Mm,
it's like that is something about because they don't play that. Like when it comes to their family and their kids, that structure, like they will
yeah.
go to hell and back to
Yes.
keep that
Yes.
structure intact. So kudos to your mother for making that call, and kudos to the
Mhm.
friend for taking the time to listen. I think that's the
Yes.
most important thing, as you mentioned just a while ago. Don't ask victims questions. Those
Hmm.
dumb, I call them dumb questions. I know I tell my students a lot
Yeah.
of times there's no dumb questions, but in certain cases there are dumb questions. And
Yeah.
this is one of those moments of, well, why don't you leave? And why don't um,
Yeah. Do you
you
want
have to
you?
be there?
Yeah. You'll be planning my funeral next week if I leave today.
Yeah,
Or it's just like, when they, it's, they ask just so many things and want you to do, want you to move differently and figure out things and do this and do that. Like, do you have a better place for me to go if I leave here today? Do you have finances for me to survive if I leave today? And especially for people who have children. Do you
yeah,
have a place for me and my children to go? Because let's be real, shelters are not the most clean places or sanitary or safe places. People have been raped and everything else in shelters too. So do you want me to pack up with my children and either, I mean, when push comes to shove, I understand you got to do what you have to do if that's the option that you have to take. But a lot of times I don't want to go from like a bad situation and go to worse in terms of living or put your children in a situation. Thankfully, I didn't have children at the time and it was just me, but still, yet, look how strategic I still had to be.
yeah.
You know, it,
So,
yeah, and it's just a lot, and there's so many people out here who are suffering. Like you said, get up, smiling, and unless there are physical marks, and he was smart. You're not hitting me in my face. You're not. But one of the things I do want to stress, David, is there are so many long term effects.
mm,
Um, I could not have even imagined the long term effects that I would have from this. Um, so just as an example, was obviously I had to seek a lot of therapy. I went through a whole nother therapy session last year. Mind you, this was in 2007, 2008. I just underwent a different therapy last year this time. Um, in 2016, I was diagnosed with pseudo seizures, which are non-epileptic seizures that my brain was processing trauma but not communicating it to me, which caused my body to react in seizure-like episodes. I have been able to manage them more now. I was having 10 to 15 a day. I was able to kind of figure out, I was very intentional about figuring it out and helping my brain communicate to me because I was like, this is not it. I cannot go in life having seizures every day like this. Um, and then last year, and I say this is TMI, but it's really not TMI because it's important. I think when people understand how trauma, any trauma for that matter, not just domestic violence, affects your health. And so last year, I was diagnosed with what they call vaginismus. And so essentially, the female body organ, basically from trauma, any sexual trauma, shuts down when it feels threatened. So it could be a very healthy relationship. You could be intimate with a very in a very healthy relationship, and that particular body part just says alert, alert, alert. No one comes in here. And it can, like, the spasms, and this is things that I just can't control, that I have to, even though mentally I thought that coming out I had to mentally work on recovering from the abuse. I didn't realize that my body would actually need recovering.
Mm.
And so, you know, that's from 2007 to now, I'm still in my healing journey, more so with my body than my mental state. So,
I'm glad you brought that up because it's so much deeper than the skin. It's so much deeper than the physical. There, emotional scars, mental scars that
mhm,
are left behind, and that leads to health. That leads to your
mhm,
physical health being damaged. And so, I'm glad you brought that up because that was going to be my next question. Was how was that transition look like now? Because now you're married and
yeah.
you're happily married and you have a beautiful family. And how do you transition into that? Coming out of that.
And David, to be very, very honest, I always tell people there is love after abuse, but you have to be very patient with yourself. And you also need a spouse that's patient. I say my husband is God sent. Because I have said to him so many times, I would not have married me, or I would have divorced me already. I came with a lot of baggage, a lot of hurt, a lot of pain that I didn't know that I had. I thought that I was okay until I literally got married and had a person who looks at me and sees me day in and day out and can assess me for stuff that I thought was, I'm okay. And one of the things that my husband and I noticed first was that he talks with his hands. And he said to me one day, he said, we had he's like, babe, do you ever realize that we go from the kitchen, like we'll be in the kitchen talking and we end up in the living room? And I'm like, okay, like what is the big deal? You know? So one day when we was talking, he's like, babe, look where you're standing. And I'm like, okay, we're in the living room. He was like, yeah, but we started in the kitchen. I'm like, okay. So what we realized was that him talking with his hands, every time he would move his hands like this to like just talking, I would kind of move and show, it was like we were dancing through the house. I would continue to step back as he stepped up to be intimate into an intimate conversation with me. And I unconsciously, not no awareness that I was doing it. And how would you unless you got a person that can bring that to your attention? Um, and another thing I like to point out is that, and this is the very honest truth, is that if you don't check yourself, if you don't do a true self assessment, you will become an abuser by default. And I have to be honest and say that after I got married, I was very, I don't want to say very, but I was verbally abusive to my husband because it was almost like I wanted to make sure that I was always in control because I never wanted to be back where I had come from.
Yeah.
And so anytime he said something, moved differently, and it looked similar, I was roaring and I was going for his throat, like verbally going for his throat, you know. Um, and I was like, whoa, I have a lot of suppressed aggression here that I am that's you know leaking out on him, and it's not him, and I have to see him for him. And you know, but it was just real conversations we had to have. And so so again, I just say being patient, but you got to be honest. And like that's why I said I have to tell people, like, yeah, I was verbally abusive to my husband when we first got together, because I had taken on those same traits that I learned from my abuser to survive. So I had to undo all of what I was used to doing, realizing that I learned those tactics to survive. And this was not a relationship where I had to survive anymore. I just needed to be, and I was safe. But, and it took some time, whole lot of prayer, whole lot of prayer,
Yeah,
whole lot of prayer.
that's
And
true.
being real though, like, I just knew, you know, my husband, he said to me, I am not going to let you sabotage this marriage. And I looked at him like, who you think you talking to?
That's that Hollywood
Uh,
coming out.
yes. I like, who you think you talking to? You know, and that's how I knew, like, you know, we can look back and laugh about it now, but it definitely wasn't funny. But just it has certainly been a journey. Um, yeah. So, but you can overcome so much, but you got to be intentional about working through it.
I like that. Um, Now, talking about your organization, Voices of Color, which I found to be absolutely just amazing, like over the top, like what you do, and the fact that you have you have what I like to call, you have experience, like you've
Mm-hmm.
experienced it, but also you have legal background, so you know how the court system works, you know what that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty sure that you've had that moment where you may have went to the hospital, or you may have had to call the cops, and what that conversation looks like. How do you prepare your clients? Because I don't want to call them victims, because
Mm-hmm.
we're all survivors, right?
Right.
Um, how do you prepare them for that conversation, those conversations, when they come to you and their first meeting with you, and they're like, you know, this is happening, this is happening. They're not taking it seriously because every state law is very different, right?
Yes.
And so, talk a
Yes.
little bit about that, because I think people need to understand how that works.
Okay, so essentially, if I get a call, or when I get a call, because the calls come, right? When I get a call, the first thing I always say to a person is, there's no judgment here. Because, and that is so important, because I want them to understand that after we finish this conversation, and I'm throwing out the options to you, I'm explaining to you, yes, this is abuse. I'm asking you, what is it that you want to do? Not what Tanesha want to do, not what Voices of Color wants to do, not what your mom, your dad, your sisters want you to do. What do you want to do? And most of the time, they're very conflicted at that moment, as people act like they're so surprised. But at the end of the day, you got to realize this is somebody that this person loves, regardless of what they've done. This is a relationship that they fell in love with the person who didn't abuse them initially. And um, I make space for them to make their own decisions. And as much as we want to be like, you need to get out, you need to get out, I don't force anyone to get out of something until they're ready. Um, and some people like, well, shouldn't you? No, because today, if I say, if they're in that space where they're just listening to everything I say, I could put them in the shelter tonight, and tomorrow they'll be right back with him or her. That's just naturally how what happens, because the statistics say you leave 7 times before you actually leave. Before you actually leave, you will go back 7 times. That's stats. And that is literally true, because even once I was out, guess what I did? When I had to move back with my mom, I would seek and still see him. That's that's the reality that we live in. And so what I explain to them is I give them my very transparent story, because what I've learned is when you're transparent, people feel comfortable then sharing their truth with you. They feel comfortable saying, because most of the time when they, and I'm gonna use the term victim right now because of this is when it has just happened, the abuse has just happened. They only want to share bits and parts because they're still trying to have their dignity in the midst of that. And so when they tell the story, sometimes they talk as if it's almost third person, and they sort of remove themselves out of, when they tell it, they're talking as if they weren't the person experiencing it sometimes. And so when I share my truth, it allows them the space of like, okay, she actually gets it. And that's what you, when you spoke about having an experience, because a lot of people that do this work, they have a passion about doing the work, right? They went to school to have an ideal about what they want to do, but they really don't understand the in-depth soul part of what it takes because they haven't experienced it. And so I get to talk to people from a different level that makes them feel comfortable. And most of the time, I have not had an incident where once I finish talking to them, they don't feel like, or they don't say to me like, I want to stay. They say to me, yes, I want to work towards that freedom. So what we do is you can't overwhelm them with services. Because their mind in that moment, you're so mentally confused and everything is just too much. So I can't be like, all right, so the day you need to do this, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do this, blah blah blah. It's too much. You literally today, I need you to, let me know what you want to do. And I'll say, let me know what you want to do. Take some time to think on it, and you can text me. If texting is what works, text me. And I use an encrypted app for them to text me through. Um, and so, because it's, you gotta let them figure it out. You gotta give them the space, because mind you, their life has been controlled, right? They haven't been able to make decisions for themselves. Somebody's been thinking for them. So now you're giving them that freedom back to say, you get to make your decisions. You are in control of your life. If you want better, you want to do better, then I am here to support you 100% of how you want to do it. I'll give you an example as I have a woman, she was brutally beat about 2.5 weeks ago, went to the hospital, eardrum busted, blurred vision, couldn't stand and walk on her own. And next week I'll be relocating her to Florida. Um, and it takes a process. So she literally got out of the hospital, had to go to rehab because she had to be work on like walking again and everything. And even through that process, she's throughout has had conversations with her abuser. And what I said to her is, you have to be careful. And I just reminded her it is best that you not communicate with him. However, if you feel that you have to, because I know that you will, because we all have, then what I need you to do, and I broke it down to safety planning. You cannot speak about, you have to be careful with giving clues out over the phone indirectly. So if you were to walk outside and be on the phone with him, you can't talk about, oh man, like that person just ran the intersection by Rite Aid, because you're giving them some sort of clue of where you're located. They can at least begin to narrow down, well, she said she could see Rite Aid. They can pretty much begin to narrow down. So what I explained to her is, I understand he's going to keep calling. He's going to tell you how sorry he is. She said, yeah. And she said, that's what's confusing me. I said, I understand. That is natural. And we have all done it. But I said, if you are communicating with him, I just need you to be careful about giving clues out, because that is your safety. And if you are, if you want to live, that is the only thing that I can offer you until you're ready. And so that's pretty much how we went. And she literally only has like $12 to her name. So a few days until I realized that she was somewhat ready and that she would try to work because you try to like self-empower them, right?
Yeah.
And so my goal was, okay, self-empower, give them a few days to see if they can put a plan together, see if they're going to work just as hard. And she wasn't financially, she just didn't have any friends or family she could go to. And so Voices of Color, I paid for her flight to go to Florida so she can get out and have her, so she can go and get freedom.
I like that. And we definitely appreciate organizations and people like yourself who are literally on the front lines doing the work. Even
Yes.
in COVID-19, a pandemic that we haven't seen of this magnitude, like our generation has never seen it. Maybe our great
No.
grandparents saw it, but we never even seen anything like this.
Mm-mm.
How has COVID-19 impacted the work that you do?
Oh my God, this has been the most busiest year that I have ever had. Why? Because when they said shelter in place and stay safe, right? That doesn't apply to domestic violence victims. Why? Because that means they're sheltering in place with their abusers. So we have seen an increase in domestic violence throughout the country, probably in every state. I'm sure the increase has like skyrocketed because you it's layered now, right? Maybe you had an outlet because he or she had to go to work during the day. So that was your piece. Now they're home with you 24 hours, 7 days a week. Some may have lost jobs. And so you're adding stress levels in a house where two people, one, let's be real, most people, even married, single, whatever, they have not been used to being under one roof. And some marriages probably are not surviving because people are not used to having to be under one roof that long with somebody they think they like or love.
That's right.
Now you have these compounded stressors adding to in that mental space, and the abuse has increased. It does not make an excuse because somebody has all these different things going on, but it certainly um, adds to people's frustrations that can lead up to like very unnecessary arguments. And so COVID-19 has definitely increased because now, what could be a little, could have been a small argument now is just going to higher levels. And um, the significance of COVID-19 was that, abusers were telling their victims, hey, they're going to give them COVID-19 if they go out, or no one is going to take you in if I give you, if you got COVID, and just different things like that, right? Because they want them to think they don't have anywhere to go. And so we've continuously put out that if you test positive for COVID, shelters will still take you. I know here, all the domestic violence shelters are still taking you, and they will just make provisions to quarantine you. So I, have let news stations know to keep airing that, to stress the importance that there's somewhere for you to go. Even if we've had to connect with even hotels here to put up survivors of domestic violence because the shelters are booked.
We prior to the interview, we had a conversation about the legal system
Mm-hmm.
and how the legal system works, and how it's not always in the favor of the survivor, of the victim. How do you prepare your clients for that, for their first court appearance, for what the outcome might be? And there's a term that you use that's, I think, is native to Michigan, but they may use it in other states. I don't know. But could you go into that? Like, tell us a little bit about that process.
Oh, okay. So, one of the things right now is, so I'll talk about just preparation for court. I essentially have to, there's really no mental preparation. Um, Essentially because most of the time the survivor has not seen their abuser since the incident. And
Mm.
so now after they have been released from the hospital and they finally get a court date, because with COVID-19 everything is so backed up, they may relive everything again. And I can't prepare them for what that's going to look like or feel like when you see that person again for the first time after they tried to kill you. What I do as far as preparing them for what may happen when it comes to the system, as we know, here in Michigan, for instance, animals, you harm an animal, it's automatically a felony. However, it takes domestic violence here is a misdemeanor. It takes 3 before it becomes a felony.
Wow.
And yeah,
Wow.
so animals have a lot more security and safety right now. Um, and so what I do ask my survivors is, what does justice look like for you? Because the system is not going to give it to you. I let them know that up front. The system is not going to give you justice. So what does justice look like for you? Because I need for you to figure out what that looks like, because it is not going to line up with the system. So for example, we went to court. I had a court date last week, and this was her first time seeing her abuser since he tried to kill her in March. And she had to testify in front of him. Mind you, so I guess this is what you were referencing about the court system right now. And I don't know, like a lot of other states, but right now, Michigan, for instance, I have 2 cases where one was in Detroit, Michigan, where a woman in a same-sex relationship, her wife shot her 11 times. And that was this time last year, September of last year. And her wife has been out on a tether since November 2019. So what that means is her wife was released on a personal recognizance bond, which is they call a PR bond, meaning they did not have to pay the 10% of what the bond was. And the judge is essentially saying, we don't believe that you're a threat to the community, and we're going to release you, but you have to appear to your court dates. It's almost like you're promising to appear at court when you have a hearing, but you just shot somebody 11 times.
Wow.
That person has been out and lives within her wife lives within 7 miles of her. So I don't know how the world would expect her to go on and feel safe when this person already tried to kill you, and they're out freely being able to do what they want with like this little ankle monitor, and they can go and come as they please, So, and particularly the one last week, this was her fiance. He's out on a tether as well, released on a personal recognizance bond. And he stabbed her over 21 times. So she had to face him and share her testimony so they could determine what they were actually going to charge him with. And they ended up charging him with 3 felonies because he had previous charges. And now that will be bound over to circuit court. And unfortunately, the problem with that is we will not probably have a trial on that case until the end of 2021. So what does that mean? That she's still out here walking around looking over her shoulder because her abuser is out freely walking in the same town. So this is why I say, even with the charges, so we did talk about what justice looked like for her. She said in her mind, it would be like 10 to 15 years. So now that sounds pretty fair, reasonable, maybe even more. You tried to kill me, right? Well, for the charges, he was charged with assault with the intent to murder. But a lot of times when they go to trial, the jury will plea it down to the lesser charge, was assault with intent to commit great bodily harm. So it's a little degree of whether they determine If they feel like he was really trying to and kill her, even though he stabbed her 20 sometimes, was he really trying to kill her, or did he really just want to cause great bodily harm? Right?
Mhm.
So that's up to a jury to decide. And we all know that juries, they're not trained or skilled in law. They're just
Right.
everyday citizens who get to have an opinion. And she, so with those charges, we were looking at three, when he just had the two felons they were charging him with, it was 3 to 10 years.
Okay.
Three, 3 years. And that's when he would be eligible for parole. And she was just like, you gotta be kidding me. And I said, this is why it's so important for you to begin to process a different definition of what justice looks like for you, because that's the reality. You know, maybe he wouldn't get parole after 3 years, but the ideal is that he will be up for parole after 3 years. And that's not justice.
It's not. It's really not. When you really
No.
look at it, it's like you don't know how many years she was in a relationship with him, but um, it could never make up for that time that was lost.
Yeah. And
I think
and
that's
I,
what really have to be taken into account.
yeah, and you talking about someone, he stabbed her all over her back, her sides, and her face and her neck. But we seen time and time again where juries come back and say not intent to murder, but intent assault with intent to commit great bodily harm. And so then that gives him a chance for the lesser sentencing terms. And that is just the reality. Like, so sad to say, it's like, is this a season? I've never known a time where you could just murder someone, but by the grace of God, they don't die. Because it's like, no, that's the grace of God. It wasn't because you as the abuser was trying to keep her alive. You were trying to kill her, but by the grace of God, she survived. But a jury gets to determine your fate on that.
Wow. Um, I know we talked about, and there's two more things I want to touch on
Oh,
before
you're
we
fine.
end. Um, there was a conversation that you mentioned about someone coming to you and they were talking about past abuse. And when they got down to the bottom to it, it was kind of like, that doesn't fall under domestic abuse, domestic
Yeah.
violence. So could you break down for our viewers what is domestic violence? What is considered what is classified as domestic violence?
Okay. So I always kind of give an example of, sometimes the easier way to explain something is to tell you what it is not. So domestic violence is not child abuse. It is not sex trafficking. It is not human trafficking. It is not any of those things. So it is a domestic violence. And this is where I think people get confused because of the word domestic. So domestic violence is an intimate partner relationship. That being the key word, intimate partner relationship. So when any violence happens, and it is between intimate partners, I mean, it can be a former spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, someone you're currently in a relationship with. Some y'all have an intimate relationship. Not You can't have an intimate relationship with your child. You can't have an intimate relationship with your uncle, your aunts, your grandmother. That's a different category. So I think what confuses people is if you were to go to, say for instance, if the police were to go to get a call for someone fighting in the house, typically they'll use the word there was a domestic dispute, right? That in the term domestic, they're saying because they were family members. But yes, that is a domestic dispute. But when we talk about domestic violence, it is intimate partner violence. And so that's why we're now and this time starting to see the word used interchangeably to make sure that people are very clear. Because even when I say intimate partner relationship, people will still associate it with, what if a parent beats their child? They don't have, they're not being intimate with their child, intimate in that context. So the other part, and I think that that is such a huge one. Most of the time people, so I want to make it clear. So child abuse can happen when there's a domestic violence relationship, but that is an extension of when, like, if your parents, for instance, if your parents are, they have a domestic violence relationship, or my parents, there's abuse happening. Sometimes the child ends up getting hurt, harmed, or killed as a result of the abuse happening between the parents. Mm. So the domestic violence in the house happened to affect the child in that context, but that is not considered, if the father or the mother were just beating on the child, that's child abuse. Or trying to think of another, but most of the time that's kind of it, because that's what I always hear somebody saying, yeah, I experienced domestic violence. My mother used to beat on me. Well, that's child abuse. That's not an intimate partner relationship, unless you were being intimate with your mom. That's incest. That's still not domestic violence. And so I think that's why sometimes when I say domestic violence, I'll end up saying intimate partner relationship, and really just having to break down what it is not. And even with human trafficking, a lot of people who are in human trafficking or have been sex trafficked, their pimps, which they end up having relationships with, they do consider that domestic violence because they are in some sort of relationship that is intimate with, maybe their boyfriend who was pimping them out or what have you. So there is still the intimate partner relationship. And even though they are being sex trafficked, they still had an intimate relationship with that person, that domestic violence was occurring at the same time.
Okay. We're gonna cut out so we can show a short snippet of the rally that you do, your annual rally, and then we're gonna come back and talk a little bit about that rally for a minute.
Okay.
All right, so we're back. So what you guys just watched was a small clip of what Miss Tanesha does every year. It's a rally where she works with survivors to put together to encourage and lift each other up, but also to help bring other survivors out and kind of encourage them to fight this fight. What does the preparation look like behind that? And um, yeah, what was the preparation behind all of that? What does that look like?
So as far as preparation, I really just have to see how I'm led every year. And the preparation is really trying to figure out what within domestic violence, what are the prominent concerns that we're seeing in that year. So for instance, this last year was a lot of issues with where abusive spouses, they were once married, divorced, and they still had to share custody. Because then that makes the survivor still have to interact with that abuser. And so we look at all those things, that the concerns of survivors throughout the year, through our State of Michigan Domestic Violence Rally page on Facebook. People will tell us like, hey, they pour in and tell us what their concerns are. What do we see people asking us questions about that seems to be prevalent? And a lot was dealing with also personal protection orders this year. And so as we look at those issues, then we say, okay, this is what is at the heart of domestic violence this year. Then these are the topics that we need to educate people on at the rally this year. Also, we always try to make it important to bring up legislation at the event because it's so hard to get domestic violence bills passed through legislation. There are so many on the books right now that you almost lose count. That they start and they never make it through the process because it's just not a priority for politicians. And so right now, like this year, we addressed the address confidentiality bill, which would allow survivors to use a PO box per the state so that their abusers can't locate them. So they wouldn't have to put on their driver's license or their voter registration, all those things that makes it easier for someone to look up your address. So that's pretty much the preparation. Also, the preparation is not every year my team looks the same. So anyone who wants to be a part of the rally, I'll allow them that space. So we oftentimes find that with survivors, a lot of them are very creative and they've just lost themselves in the abuse process, and they may be artists, they may be singers and have entertainment, and I allow the rally to be that space for them. If they want to create art that speaks to it, I allow that space. And so this year we had a woman who owned a restaurant, and so she provided the food for the rally.
Good.
It just creates an environment where people get to have a voice. If and at the very end of the rally, I allow survivors to come up and share their story. If it's just like here's 30 minutes of time blocked off for survivors to share their story if they want to. They don't have to, but if they want to. And we try to we're making it, Voice of Color is really making it a point to say no organization can do this by themselves. So if we don't decide to work together, this will always be the case. So I also, if there's an organization, you don't have to be a domestic violence organization, but if you have a resource or products, for instance, that even if it's just like you sell aromatherapy products, like that can be very therapeutic for a survivor. I allow people to set up resource tables for free at the rally to just share the resources that they provide, um, just as an opportunity for survivors to really know, like, there are a lot of people out here rooting for you and there's space for you. Um, and because a lot of times we just don't know the resources that are available, right? And this year we didn't get to do it because the weather was a little bit cooler than last year. But this was going to be our first year doing a butterfly release. And so, as you know, the butterflies represent the transformation of how we operate from being a victim to a survivor. And so these transformation stages that we go through as a victim to survivor to thriver, as we call it, um, we release the butterflies on their behalf and we say their names. And so I think as long as we continue to acknowledge them, and so that preparation is easy, but it's also can be complex because a lot of people, and I'm gonna say this but it's sad to say, I have had to be very careful and cautious about who I allow on the team because they're not ready, and they may make statements because sometimes it will allow you to be in a space of bitterness, and you could say something that would not be productive for another survivor. And so I kind of evaluate when survivors, sometimes they come right out of these relationships and like, I'm ready to work. And I'm like, you're not ready. And I have to kind of coach them for a while, or I just allow them to kind of work in the background on certain things, but not actually speak to matters because they're not ready. Um, but most of the time, and some we do have where they want their story to be more traumatic than the next story, right? I have to have the most juiciest story, and that's sad because we shouldn't want, no, none of us should want our stories, right?
Yeah.
But there are some very competitive individuals who's like, my story is worse than your story. Well,
Yeah.
that's
That's
sad,
not
you
what we
know?
do.
Yeah. So, um, I have to be careful and kind of have some discernment about it as well.
So, this has been an amazing time sitting here learning from you, listening to you once again, because I miss that. I miss being in high school, with, like sitting in the courtroom and like watch her. Like y'all don't understand. Like you thought she owned the courtroom. She had that much of a presence when she walked in, and still made us all feel just as powerful in the courtroom, being like country kids, as I like to say, in rural North Carolina. And I love the fact that you have taken um, the ashes and made something beautiful, allow God to make something beautiful
Yes.
out of that. And so God bless you for that. But if you could just give a little bit encouragement to maybe there's that person, male or female, who may be in something right now and they still on that edge, like, I don't know what to do, I don't know where to go. um could you give them just a little encouragement, a little push that kind of encouraged them before we conclude today?
Um, if you are someone who is experiencing domestic violence in any fashion, maybe you are not even sure, but if you aren't sure, that probably means that you are in a domestic violence relationship. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns about that, even though I live in the state of Michigan, I am a resource for you no matter what state you're in. I am willing to help you. If you just want to ask questions, I can answer questions. My encouragement would be to you is that you know who you are, you know who you've been. God has purposed you for greater, whether you're a believer or not. And I am a living, breathing testimony that I was one who lost myself, and you can be found again. Being intentional, even though you may be going through something, there's still at the pit of your stomach, there is still something. There's that seed in you that can still blossom and be what it was purposed to be. And that alone gives you the motivation to, if you, long as you can stay breathing. I always say that I remember writing something that said, I would rather be beat 5 more nights than to leave and be killed in one night. Very strong statement. I encourage you to seek out support that you feel comfortable with. Every you won't all it won't all make sense right away. You will still love this person. You will still want to be with this person. Those are very natural feelings. Don't judge yourself. Be patient with yourself and know that this doesn't define you. It doesn't make you stupid. It doesn't make you weak. And only people who have been through this can understand and empathize with you. And if you have people pouring into you that don't align with that, then those are not the individuals you need to be speaking to. So seek out someone like me who gets it and who is willing to be there to give you a sound ear and sound advice. But again, someone who's saying they'll be there for you. That door will be open when you're ready. And that is what What's the Color does. When you're ready, the door is open.
Thank you so much for that. So you guys, I'm going to put all her contact information um, for the organization in the information bar under the video. So you guys can definitely reach out to her or even refer somebody, share the information with somebody, share this video,
Mhm.
this interview with someone who may need this help because domestic violence awareness does not just end in October, right?
Yes.
It's year-round work. So definitely share this with someone. This could be the thing that saves someone's life. Once
Yes.
again, Ms. Tanesha, thank you so, so much. We are so grateful at New Our Life Magazine that you took the time out of your busy schedule because this woman is busy. Like she just got um, thank you for taking the time out for sharing your story, your experience with us. And just helping to encourage others. So we are forever grateful, and we definitely look forward to partnering with you in the future.
Yes,
So
yes. If you guys, well, thank you, David, for having me. Like, I am so impressed with seeing the adult version of you. I've always told you I knew you would do big things, and I just sitting here talking to you just brightens my day. Like, to know that I had even if it was a small impact into your life, I'm just excited to be sitting here talking to you, knowing where you're going, and yeah, it's just amazing. So thank you for even considering me to be here. Thank you for having the conversation that many don't want to have, and making sure that you bring it to the forefront. And as a Black male, especially, to say domestic violence is not okay. And if anytime in Pennsylvania you guys want me there, I'm there. So I'm a phone call away.
definitely. So thank you once again. You guys make sure you tune in for the next episode of New Our Life Magazine Presents. Subscribe to our YouTube page. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. We everywhere. Check us out and definitely tune in. Thank you.